Hello, so the topic we picked is marriage, me and Jimmy. To my left, he'll come here as soon as I'm done with my part. Marriage. Understanding the old marriage system in the Bible. It made a lot of sense for the times. It may have been unjust and unfair for today's standards, but there were economic reasons, social safety nets, and even arguably feminist reasons. What seems rough to us as we look at this from a modern surface perspective was quite a liberal concept during these times, and a way for marginalized women to survive and even endure within their social status. We are accustomed in modernity to think of marriage as a marriage of companions. There is a widespread belief in much of the West of ideally marrying your best friend. This is a very new concept to the world, so new that this was not yet a notion for even our grandparents or as recent as a century ago. Marriage was still men acquiring women as property rights. There is no companion marriage in the Bible. There was no marriage of equals. There is a perception that does not exist in the Bible. There is always a big power imbalance when it comes to marriage in the Bible. Women are not full people. There is no meeting of equals in a practical sense, and people who like one another are far and few between. The women's value was largely based around the initial virginity and then their ability to have numerous children, especially male heirs. The familiar term, marriage between one man and one woman, is not in the Bible. There is largely a white Christian Protestant concept. Today, this is how the vast majority of people in the United States see marriage, and it is historically a very recent concept. Marriage is a thing the Bible wants to encourage for alliances, inheritance, expansion of territory, making peace, and having children. These are the reasons why the Bible endorses marriage. But there are many marriages in the Bible that lead to the downfall of men. These are told as cautionary tales. You should marry, but need to be careful about it, is always the theme. Bathsheba was almost the downfall of David, and Solomon had hundreds of wives. In 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 through 13, this story is told. Solomon ended up overtaxing the kingdom because of the enormous amount of wives he had. He had 700 wives and over 300 concubines, and the wives did not assimilate into the local culture and religion. He even built the palace and temple for them. There was a theme that a wife may become her husband's god and take the attention away from God. Solomon and others in his situation may have been more concerned with keeping their wives happy than making God happy. It is understood that women can drag a man down, and Solomon had many, many women. He ended up angering God because he prioritized the wants and needs of wives more than those of God. This story is likely told as a lesson of warning. Concerning polygamy, nobody in the New Testament is married to more than one person simultaneously. Ideas about marriage were changing during this time, at least in the territories where the events of the Bible are concerned, specifically the Roman Empire, who ruled the territories of the Levant as well as all of the Mediterranean Europe and much of Middle Europe, and going as far east as modern-day Turkey along with North Africa. Multiple wives are common in the Old Testament. Polygyny is often frowned upon today for various reasons, one of them being that it is commonly associated with a type of patriarchal misogyny that oppresses women. This may have been the case often and may still be the case where it is being practiced, but this is not the entire story either, especially concerning its practice within the time frame of the Levant from Abraham to Jesus. Polygyny, for all its offensive problems from the modern perspective, is a good economic arrangement, both for the man and for the woman during the time that the books of the Hebrew Bible were written. With more families involved in these marriages comes more wealth. There is also more of an insurance net with regards to child and women mortality, which was much higher during these times than in modern times in developed nations. If such a tragedy occurred where a wife dies in childbirth, the loss would be mitigated because there are other wives to take her place to nurse a child. And because there are other wives, There are also more likelihood to have offspring, which can be compared to a valuable commodity, much more so than today. Children were needed, boys were a large asset for manual labor, and daughters were very valuable as unmarried virgins. This was all economically beneficial, so the more children, the better. There were also typically more women than men. Men died in combat, in disputes, as well as war. At the Syrians right there. This made the gender ratio quite uneven in general, with a lot of surplus women. Going into polygynous marriage was the best option for many women by a wide margin. This was a social safety net as well as economic safety. A married woman, especially with children, was in far better social position than a prostitute, for instance. And now, Jimmy.
Hey. So, marriage in the New Testament. During and after the time of Jesus, there was a radical shift about the idea of marriage in the Christian world. Influencing this was a new perception about a great impending apocalypse. The Apostle Paul believed that everyone should become completely sexless and unmarried as himself, which was a very controversial idea. Paul had an idea of good relationships. If there were to be a hierarchy, there would be a virgin who doesn't want to have sex at the top of the hierarchy, and below that would be a married couple who only become intimate with each other and no one else. Being unmarried and fornicating is very low. They are considered dregs of society. Paul wondered why fellow Christians would want to have children when the end of the world is coming soon. This was probably not written by Paul because he was not into hierarchical marriage roles like this, but in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 through 33, there is a new idea about marriage that relates to the hierarchy of the Christian religion. The idea here was that the wives must be subject to their husbands, as the church is subject to Christ, but it also goes on to say with quite a bit of elaboration that husbands must care for their wives like Jesus sacrificed and cared for the church. There is further implication that husbands should love their wives as they love their own bodies, with the implication that everyone loves their body. It is probably going too far to call this feminism, but this is a rare example in the Bible of what appears to be genuine concern for the welfare of women, married women in the case. Now, the fall of polygamy. Prior to these times, polygyny had been a normal aspect of society. It was a tradition that was socially accepted and embraced. The Greco-Roman society began to develop, and what was deemed control and self-restraint took form as a social norm. The restraint in this case was having one wife and not several, much less many. The one wife, one husband, monogamous arrangements became the dominant form of marriage. Civilization in this part of the world became more civilized by being restrained compared to the barbarians on the outskirts of the empire that they were familiar with. This was a big change in the culture from the past. In the Old Testament, polygyny was normal and valued, but in the New Testament during Apostle Paul's time, it was monogamous relationships that were valued and normalized. There were still people with more than one wife during this time, but they were considered odd compared to the mainstream society. In Timothy 1, verse 3, the author, who probably was not Paul, talks about marrying more than one person. Here the author is showing that ideal church deacons, who are members and servants of the Christian church, are civilized compared to others. They must not be drunks, they must be sensible, they must be good teachers, they must not be hotheads, they must not be greedy for money, they must keep their children submissive, and they must marry only once, among other so-called civilized things. It is also implies that if a deacon cannot manage his own household, they have no business taking care of God's church. Marrying Jesus is a central theme going around during Paul's time, and he emphasizes this greatly. Paul set up a lot of marriage metaphors about how Christians are supposed to marry Jesus. Jesus can marry lots and lots of people, and also implies that men must marry Jesus. The church is a single unit that is like a female who is married to Jesus. This is how they rationalize it as monogamy. Nuns marry Jesus. Women need male authority. If a woman is a virgin but doesn't get married to a man, Jesus can be that man. Lots of nuns wear wedding rings and wedding dresses on the day they become nuns. God as the Father is head of Christ, who is head of man, who is head of the woman. When it comes to sexuality between married couples, it only concerns procreation and the submission of the woman.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.